It's 12 o'clock. Welcome to today's talk/seminar, moving towards a green practice, sustainable approaches in visual arts. My name is Aslak Höjersten. I'm the managing director of VISP, which is the arts organization for everyone who works within contemporary art in Norway. Artists, curators, gallerists. You can all join up for free. It takes about 2 or 3 minutes at visp.no. So this is the first of this year's series of talks about the issue of how artists can work more, or anyone in the art scene can work more in line with sustainable ideas. We have invited artist Skade Henriksen, who lives and works in Bergen. She's originally from Finnmark in northern Norway, works with drawing, photography, sculpture, and installation. She combines the poetic with semi-scientific approach to artistic research. With a background as a research technician, she uses scientific instruments and records as a working method and reference point in her works. Central to her work is the exploration of landscape, focusing on landscape change, mining, and notions of time and value. She recently exhibited at Bodø Biennale and at Preuss Norway's National Photo Museum. Upcoming exhibitions include Alta Museum in Norway and La Art Museum in Iceland. Was that the correct pronunciation, Skade?
I think so. I'm actually not sure myself. It's in a small town called Arnasiga.
Okay.
So they have a museum there owned by a couple of the municipalities close by.
I see. Just a quick thing, if people want to ask questions, they can either post them at the Q&A or raise hand, and we'll do the question round at the end, which will be around before 1 o'clock, I assume.
Yes.
Also, this talk is being live streamed on YouTube and will be available on our channel later. So I'm just going to pass the ball to you, Skade.
Thank you. So welcome, everyone. So I'm delighted to be here today to talk about some sustainable approaches in visual arts. So first of all, thank you to Visp and to Aslak for the invitation. So I think I'll just share screen. This is sort of the digital loveliness that we're living in. Let's see here. Share. Okay, so the talk today is titled Moving Towards a Green Practice, Sustainable Approaches in Visual Arts. So as Aslak mentioned, my name is Skade Henriksen, and I come from Finnmark. It is the northernmost county in Norway, and I'm a visual artist. So before I delve into my artistic practice and its relation to sustainability, I'd like to share a bit about my background and my previous work. So from my background, I think it might be relevant to mention that in the Sami language, there is no direct translation for the Western concept of nature. So instead, a variety of terms are used depending on context and relation. So this sort of relational approach to nature has definitely influenced my work. So in the Sami language, the concept of luonto encompasses sort of the character of something or someone, while mehti refers to geographical areas or territories. Now, those are often dependent on the associated practice to that area. So that relational understanding of nature sort of defines relationships rather than one definitive thing. So, as mentioned also by Aslak, so during my studies, I worked as a research technician for marine biologists. So I spent hours in front of a microscope sorting through benthic fauna. Now that means sort of small animals that live on the ocean floor. So looking at polychaetes, crustaceans, mollusks, you name it. This experience, sort of alongside my art studies, has also shaped my artistic practice, sort of that view through the microscope. So after completing my master's degree, I've been involved in several projects that combine art and science. So one of these projects is Climate Narratives. It's an interdisciplinary research project hosted by the University of Bergen, but it has quite a few international partners. It's funded by the Research Council of Norway. So, the research project, Climate Narratives, it's focusing on the impact of climate change on indigenous communities in Greenland and the low-lying Pacific Islands. And as the project coordinator and artistic advisor, I've had the opportunity to sort of explore the intersection of climate science, social science, alongside indigenous knowledge and narratives. Another project that I've been involved in is called Sense STEAM at HVL, or the Western Norway University of Applied Sciences, which is their long title. So the Sense STEAM project promotes art integrative science education. So you're combining science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And I've sort of contributed there with how they can foster creative thinking and inclusion in science education. So in my own artistic work, I've explored themes of landscape and environmental change, landscape change. And this image is from an island called Senja in northern Norway. It's in Troms County. There I've worked with a graphite mine since 2018. And more recently, I have also worked with an iron ore mine in Kirkenes. And additionally, I would like to mention that I'm part of an artist collective called Solastalgia. It sort of approaches landscape and landscape change in a more contemplative and philosophical manner, and sort of that having that collective where I can think together with fellow artists has been really, really beneficial for my practice. So I believe that these projects and my artistic practice are relevant in the context of today's theme. So moving towards a green practice, sustainable approaches in visual arts. So when you're asked to talk about sustainability, it's difficult not to mention some key themes. So I'd like to briefly address the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, as they might be known as, and the urgency of the climate crisis highlighted in the latest United Nations Climate Change Conferences, or COP meetings, as they're also known as. Now, COP stands for Conference of the Parties, and the parties in this case are the countries that signed up to the original UN climate agreement in 1992. So, and the next COP meeting will take place in Baku in Azerbaijan in November this year. So the SDGs containing or consisting of 17 goals are often referred to, or I would refer to them as sort of the ultimate wish list. So no poverty, zero hunger, good health, all of those things. But for the context of today's talk, we would then emphasize the goals related to climate action and decent work and economic growth. So speaking of sustainable growth, it's crucial to question whether true sustainability and indefinite growth can coexist. So personally, I find it rather obvious that these two do not go hand in hand. And I would like to mention a fellow artist. So recently, I had the pleasure of meeting Danish artist Mette Riise, and she's created a series of mockumentaries. So just emphasizing mock here. And in one of her works, she refers to an environmental report titled "The Limits to Growth" from 1972. So that work examines sort of the growth paradigm of Western capitalism and its disregard for planetary boundaries. So from 1972. So I would recommend Mette Riise's sort of mockumentaries that delve into that. It's also relevant in the context of today's talk, I think, if you're interested in that type of subject. And there are many artists who work with themes such as climate change, nature, science, landscape, and related subjects. Now, however, I think it's important to note that addressing sustainability in artistic practice doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be working with these specific themes. So even if an artist focuses on topics such as gender equality, feminism, war, sustainability is still involved in some way in any artistic practice. So we're all human beings, we're all involved in this together, and we have lives, jobs, bills to pay, children, and other responsibilities. So now let's talk about the belief in the artist's role. So there's a clear belief in art or the artist's role in conveying something that a 600-page report from a climate summit might fail to express. So perhaps in search for solutions, people look to the creative. So it might be hard to imagine something as large as the climate crisis. So there might be sort of this imagination crisis versus a climate crisis. So while science often focuses on finding a solution to a problem, artists tend to approach challenges through more exploration and inquiry. So the artist's working method is more about searching than finding a definitive answer with like 3 red lines underneath the answer. So this brings me to the idea that the artist's role goes beyond simply providing solutions. So art has the power to evoke emotions, provoke thoughts, and stimulate conversations in a way that scientific reports cannot. And I do know that there is sort of this call for action, less talking, a sense of urgency, but I think it's easier to reach the people that you really want to reach with conversation rather than finger wagging. So in addition to addressing issues directly related to sustainability, such as climate change and environmental degradation, artists also contribute to the sustainability agenda by addressing broader societal issues. So ultimately, I would say that the artist's role in addressing sustainability is multifaceted. So we can be involved on an individual level, creating work that raises awareness and provokes action. But additionally, we can participate in larger contexts, so influencing policy and advocating for change. So if we now move from these larger currents to my own practice, what do I do? I would first of all like to emphasize the words moving towards. So let's start with an anecdote. So I enjoy weeding in the garden. My partner and I bought a house with a garden of over 1,700 square meters. So this garden, it has been left to disrepair for over 25 years. And one of the challenges that we faced was the large number of blacklisted or unwanted plants in Norwegian flora. So these invasive species were taking over and replacing native ones like blueberry heather and native bushes and trees. So almost every day throughout the year, I spend some time weeding in my garden. So making room for the species I want to cultivate on the plot. So while the plot is far from untouched nature, it sort of aligns with a larger personal goal, which is to produce as much food as I can just 3 meters away from my living room door. I see a sustainable approach in art as similar to this weeding practice. It's a gradual process. You don't always see immediate progress, but over time, results become evident. Now, how can I weed out elements of my artistic practice to move towards a more sustainable approach? Again, this moving towards. So I can mention, or I'd like to mention 2 concrete examples of projects that I'm currently working on. And please do take note. I don't think that any of my projects are these gold-edged best practice examples. I work slowly but surely to weed out elements that are unsustainable and try to cultivate sustainable solutions. So when we talk about sustainability, we can of course talk about shipping and crating. What do we use? Is the filling material or packaging reused? Is the box reused? Would you like to use it again? The other thing we can mention is air freight versus boat freight. Now, boat freight releases approximately 80% less CO2 than air freight. But can shipping be avoided altogether? Can you produce locally? So an example from my practice is a work that's not finished yet. It's going to be shown in this previously mentioned show in Iceland. So it will consist of a relatively large rock and sound. Now I avoid shipping altogether by having the rock sourced or the work produced in the same place as the exhibition. The stone will be collected in the area very locally and will also be returned to the place of origin after the exhibition. So and that is all in collaboration with a local service provider. So there is therefore no return shipping either. But now we can see this as sustainability in several ways, perhaps especially if you show work in places outside sort of very central areas. So using local resources contributes to a greater or lesser extent to economic sustainability also in the area. It can also be mentioned that none of the elements for this particular work, for the sound, none of the elements for sound and sound recording will be newly purchased. They're all reused. So I would also like to be transparent and say, yes, I am myself traveling to Iceland to do the work, but I also fill my time when I am there with more work than this one show that I'm attending. So I can get more work done with this one trip instead of going back and forth several times. So less trips, longer trips, and chained travel. So I was mentioning air freight. So air freight would be the next example I'm going to show you, where if I were to choose air freight, it would be 1.14% of 1.14 tons of CO2 emissions. So, and there by boat freight, you're down at 0.01 for the same trip. So this particular work, I am showing a larger wall piece in a group exhibition in northern Norway, in Kirkenes. So in this case, the work has been transported to the north. But instead of it being transported to the south again to be stored in my studio for a short time, I'm now making sure to connect exhibitions where the same work can be shown, where the locations are closer together in distance. So sort of these pairings or links of exhibitions are not always possible, and I am aware of that. But in those cases where it is possible, I would certainly recommend planning it that way. So in this case, the work is going back to Tromsø instead of back to Bergen and then to Tromsø after a while. So that sort of brings me to my next point, which is time. And I know from experience that time constraints and hasty decisions sort of lead to the least sustainable solutions. So can we as individual artists, but also in communication with the galleries and institutions that we're working with, put in the time and the space to have the opportunity at all to choose sustainable solutions? So instead of this quickly, everything should have been done yesterday. So speed or this haste can be a bad environmental indicator. If the art world changed some of its modes of operation or business models, so stuff it took longer, it was planned more in advance. So I'm saying this being well aware that, of course, there are plenty of open calls for shows happening 2 to 3 years ahead in time, but sort of they still tend to get to the practicalities of the exhibition in the last bit of planning. So if the artist as one actor in this, together with the second actor, which is the gallery or whatever venue, could plan properly ahead and actually could, make provisions that would make a difference. So the third actor would be the collectors. Are they raising concerns about sustainability in the art world? The collector or the end customer, if we're going to go into that type of corporate speak, or a client, in my experience, is not frequently initiating discussions about sustainability that I have seen. So, however, it's sort of crucial to recognize that the end customer often plays sort of a central role or a significant role in driving change. Their preferences or values and demands can shape the practice of also the artists and the galleries and the broader art industry. So therefore, I think there is a potential for a shift towards sustainability if collectors and end customers begin to prioritize it more actively, prompting artists and institutions to respond accordingly. The last bit that we could get at here is, of course, funding. There are not that many funding options in place for, again, the individual artist to choose sustainable approaches. The sustainable approaches can sometimes cost more in terms of money or time, so that they cost more in terms of time and money. So that would also be an aspect to get into. So lobbying together with the artist unions to actually secure funding options for sustainable choices. Now, I know that, for instance, UKS have done some work here. They have this, or Unge Kunstneres Samfund, they had a report for climate action, and it sort of goes into how artist organizations can address the climate and the environmental crisis in a structural and systemic way. Let's see. The slide wants to move. So, can get into what can we do? So, I, like many of you, I have art as my workplace. I am self-employed. I'm a mini company. So I therefore also try to implement some strategies that we can find in sort of larger business. So I think the first step would be, tracking your emissions, calculating. That's what all the major businesses do. Where do I consume the most? Where can I save? So, and from that, then we can begin the process of reducing. So energy, shipping, travel, sort of different measurements show different places where different businesses can put their pressure on improvement. I know few artists who are not a little bit cold when they're working in the studio. So maybe it's not, where you have the biggest emissions is not for heating. But this will, of course, sort of be different if it is a large museum that has to keep air conditioning, temperature control, etc. running. So for them, that would look different. It's also what type of actor are you in the art world? So as an individual artist, I don't know if I can have a lower temperature in my studio. But by mapping out what it is about your small company that has the biggest impact on your emissions, you can sort of get to a starting point. So this may seem like a given, but I think it's important to convey. So a performance artist who only uses their own body will probably quickly see that they are not blowing the CO2 budget for their little company on shipping and crating. So the first, sort of to summarize, would be measure and educate yourself on the subject. Use tools online to calculate your emissions and carbon footprint. And the best part of all of this is that it's free. It absolutely doesn't cost you anything to do this, to take these steps. So there are quite a few online tools, and we can get back to that towards the end. So the second I talked about was sort of shows in a row or no shipping at all. So this one is obvious, and you will probably come across this in every talk that you attend about sustainability in the arts. Can you reuse or buy the shipping box? Can you reuse the packaging or the protective layer of material inside the box? But I think the whole, can you avoid shipping altogether, or can you consider producing locally? So again, you're approaching something. You at least ask yourself the question. And thereby you avoid, with the local production, you can avoid shipping. And in addition, you're contributing to economic sustainability in the area where you will show the art. A positive side effect of local production can also be, in my own experience, new connections locally at the site where you're showing, and also new points of view. You will come into contact with people you would otherwise not talk to. So sea freight, rail freight, or even car freight, considering an increasingly large electric delivery vehicle fleet against air freight, that's a consideration that you make. And then you have time, so better planning, less haste. Can you and your venue plan in sufficient time to consider a slower way to transport your work? Can you find ways to finance your greener choices? And then advocate for funding options. So pushing galleries or museums, the venues that you're collaborating with, and collectors, the people who buy the art, to factor in the green transition in the art world. So you can engage even slightly with the artist unions towards solutions and funding options. Because it is quite evident that some, not all, but some of the transitions that we are going to make or have to make are also more costly. So one thing that I don't see that many artists talk about is placement of their funds. So if we look again at our artistic practice as a workplace, then we have some funds that come in and go out. And in addition, we may have loans, a company car on lease. I know at least a few artists who have that, and preferably some pension savings if you're thinking ahead. So first, can you check where your pension funds are located? Where has the company or fund made their investments? So moving your pension money to a more sustainable provider is a powerful and quite easy step to take. So you can also find out how green your bank is. So that's also quite easy to switch banks. So if you do switch banks and you do switch your pension provider, explain to your old service provider why you're making the change. That way you're sort of demanding also a change from your old provider. So some of the largest banks in Europe, they have changed their policies of investment to be more sustainable and ethical because of public pressure. So in Norway, there's this ethical bank guide that you could use. It's also available for free online, so that you can make an informed decision. And I'm sure that there are similar tools in other countries if your funds are placed outside of Norway. So, for example, the public pressure has led HSBC, which is sort of the largest bank in Europe, to announce that it will no longer finance new oil and gas projects as part of its updated climate policy. I think otherwise we can, of course, mention everything that everyone already thinks about. So that's recycling, renting, or borrowing rather than buying new materials. Also deleting maybe some emails and look at how much cloud data you really need. Like often we do not need 700 raw files with documentation of a single work in an exhibition. But you might still have that. I know I have had that in the past. And when it comes to specific resources, I was thinking that we can sort of collect some links. I've seen that done previously in some of the VISP talks, and sort of they are posted in the comment field during or after the recording of the conversation, and easily available, so that you can go into the YouTube channel afterwards and find sort of links to different resources. So I hope that I've brought some useful reflections in this talk, and I would be really happy to open up sort of for questions and conversation, so that in line with my own experience when producing locally or when being part of an artist collective, it's sort of been always, I think, fruitful rather than having a monologue to have a dialogue. So that would be really good if we can sort of open up the floor.
Thank you so much, Skada. I think it's very interesting that you bring in collectors, kind of putting a bit of pressure on galleries and collectors. Do you think is it easy for an artist to have that approach?
If it's easy, well, I think that, of course, it depends on where you are in your career. I think that when you're in the start of your career, it might feel like it's not that easy at all. That it might be sort of more the, just do this. Yeah, I think it would be maybe you might feel that you're sort of pressured to be this sort of yes person. You say yes to anything and everything, turning into, I don't know if anyone remembers this bad movie from, I guess it's from the 90s with Jim Carrey, who's the yes man. He has to say yes to everything. I think quite a few artists can recognize themselves in that. So might be harder then, but I can also see that more established artists, they're sort of paving the way. And I think you're absolutely entitled to do that also if you feel comfortable doing it. But of course, that might affect some of your financial situation. That might happen.
Yeah, definitely. It's also like, how do you respond if you're being invited to a biennale in, let's say, El Paz or something, across the waters, you know?
Yeah.
And it's so interesting that you show this map of Finnmark, and because this is maybe something that not a lot of people in Central Europe would understand. The distance, the time and cost just by travel in northern Norway.
Yeah, and also just the roads. It's not like a high-speed highway that's interlinking the scarce cities that are up north. So, you know, just the time spent and just the miles traveled, like the closest, if you go into Google Maps and you sort of plot in a route to drive from Kirkenes to Tromsø, it will like the fastest route would be to drive through Finland and then northern Finland and then back into Norway and over. So it's so just that has been really sort of a valuable step for me, is trying to then in the extent that I can try to plan sort of these linked exhibitions. But that also, maybe it even means using sort of, most artists have quite a large network, either from your studies or otherwise, people you meet. And in this case, I just reached out to a colleague and asked, hey, I would really need to use like 2 square meters to store some work. Can I do that? And I'll even pay you a little bit for that, but it's even just a fraction of the cost for me, rather than sort of shipping it here and there and back and forth, or renting like a storage space. And which in turn also turns into sort of this conversation and maybe a dialogue with someone you would not be in touch with. So I find it quite valuable, just trying to look for these sort of alternative solutions.
So if people want to ask a question, they can either, as you said in the start, write it in the Q&A. They can also raise a hand, which should be on the bottom of your screen on the Zoom, if you want to ask it verbally. Also, this talk will be available on our YouTube channel. It's normally under live or direkte. That's where they are saved and are available. I don't want to show you my phone and the numbers of unanswered emails. I'll just imagine. But yeah, sure. It's something that maybe haven't been spoken a lot about in the past. It's something I just pretty much realized the past year. I think this idea of what you save, what's in the cloud or whatever, you know. Maybe not part of the discussion until quite recently.
Yeah, and that's also quite an easy step to take. Of course, you can also always nitpick. I've seen people nitpicking that, okay, but you spend, electricity with your device when you're deleting the emails, and how would you calculate those two things? But I just think these massive computers or data centers that are being built everywhere, and that's also, sustainability might not just be about CO2 emissions. It's about using resources. It's also about using land. So that's very relevant in the Norwegian context lately, with windmills and seeing the areas taken for that. Okay, you're in this sort of race towards sort of green energy, but you lose other things along the way. And when everything, when you're counting the numbers, then maybe it's not as green as you would have liked to think.
Yeah,
begin with.
there's a question here. How do you go about working with new or bought materials like paper fabric that you need towards your artistic practice?
Yes, so I've seen, I'm interested in the subject. So I see quite a lot of artists there sort of even inventing sort of new materials. I know about artists, it turns into sort of this semi-eco art. It's not been, uh, so again, if I go back to this sort of weeding anecdote, and as I said, I don't have these sort of gilded best practice projects. I try to weed out as much as I can. And I do buy new materials, but I also try to source reused materials, or I buy materials that artist colleagues might have, but they're not using. So instead of buying it complete, it's new, but it's not new, sort of, it's secondhand, if you'd like to say that. Yes. I don't know if that sort of answers the question slightly. But again, it's important for me, I think, the transparency that I'm not like I'm not speaking in this sort of talk saying that I do everything correctly. And I think that's sort of also a point where we go wrong, because you can this sort of fear of not doing everything correctly at once sort of in turn turns into not doing anything. You're sort of hands tied, you're afraid of your foot stepping in the wrong way. So I think it's better to just start in one end, and then you can slowly, your plot can be weed free.
Yeah, it's I forgot to say in the start, but this is like we invite different artists and also maybe some organizations to talk about sustainability, and it's not like it's not you're not presenting a Bible and all the correct solutions. It's your take on it and how you what you've experienced, and what you thought through. But there will be maybe another artist will have a different approach, and I assume they will. So it's quite it's yeah, it's important just to get a lot of feedback, I think, from different points of view.
Mm. And as I mentioned at the very end, the one thing that I see quite not that many artists talking about is just, considering the amount of money that actually move through the art world in production phase or through the small artist companies. If you accumulate all those small artist companies, it's quite, it's a substantial amount of money. And what can you do when it comes to banking and your pension funds and where they are invested? So that's sort of the one tip I would really like to emphasize.
Definitely. Yeah, I've just been to the Venice Biennale, and I always have this sort of icky feeling, just the amount of what goes into that production of transport and money and pollution, basically. So yeah,
Yes, and that's also one of the things. So in this talk, I'm trying to sort of approach what can I do as sort of my mini company, my workplace, me, my artistic practice, and then what happens in the dialogue with a bigger institution. So the gallery or a biennale or an art weekend or whatever you're attending. So visitor travel is sort of the big, or even the art fairs that people are sort of traveling to. Stockholm Supermarket was just this weekend, so you see a lot of people going, and how many people, and so the visitor travel sort of is, I guess it would be inevitable sort of that happening, but then again, can you link your travels? Can you do more than that one thing? Can
yeah.
you so
One step that I'm trying to do, but I don't know if it has an effect, to be honest, but I never sort of travel by plane one day and return the same day. I kind of find that immoral, unethical in a way. So I try to, if I'm traveling somewhere else, I try to fill that time with some content and meetings, not just this sort of one meeting. This is also why we're trying to do these series online.
mm.
Yeah. But of course, there are issues when it comes to online production of, yeah, as we said, the clouds and the storage.
Mm.
Oh.
But also this belief in the artist's role, just opening up to thinking in creative ways.
Yeah.
That's also a contribution towards sustainability. So it doesn't necessarily mean that your art needs to be eco art or your art needs to be climate change art or framed in that box, but just sustainability takes many forms. So just being open for that as well.
Right. Yeah.
Any other questions from anyone attending? I would be happy to answer if I can.
Yeah. Let's see if there's coming anyone. As I said, you can push the raise hand button on the bottom left, no, sorry, bottom right on my screen at least, and then we come up this hand, as you can see, if you want to ask your question live, or you can write it in the Q&A, or there's also a chat function. Yeah. But if not, I think we're going to end this talk. As I said, it's available on our YouTube channel for future reference, as you say.
And I can link to you have organizations and projects that have been carried out in Europe. So you have something called Julie's Bicycle, where they have sort of a carbon, you make a profile and you can do sort of a carbon calculation per year, and then you can compare your years, but also other sort of online resources that you can use also for single shipping and looking at things like that, but also this green bank, trying to find a better service provider for your banking. So all of that, I can collect that and send through a collection of links.
You can post it both on visp.no under the event and on the YouTube channel on the post. Okay. Thank you everyone who took part today. There were some issues with the registration. I'm sorry about that, but thank you the ones who made it through the gate, so to speak. So thank you again, Skada.
Thank you for having me.
I keep thinking green, everyone, and yeah, all the best. Bye.